Hey, welcome to my boat. I upgraded all the sonar on my boat this past winter, and I added active target. And so I looked at what I need to do with the transducer, and I decided pretty quick I didn't want it on the trolling motor because I'm out here in Kansas where we get just a little bit of wind once in a while, and I didn't want that trolling motor hunting around all the time and while I'm trying to watch the active target screen. You might hear some of that wind today. It's dropped down into the upper 30s, so it's not as bad as yesterday, but in case you hear the background noise. So I decided to go with a separate pole and looked on YouTube, found the old PVC pole. Works really well for me, that's what I made, and I think it's a good design. But what I couldn't find on YouTube was a good way, do-it-yourself way to deploy it in the water and then to stow it. So I invented one, and that's what this video is about. It's not about another PVC pole, it's about how to deal with the pole you have. I'm not terribly demanding in what I want, other than maybe for my hunting and fishing equipment, but the few things that I wanted was, one, it had to be square to the water every time I put it in there, without adjusting it or tweaking it or looking at it or eyeballing it and guessing. No loosening and tightening, and it had to be very rigid, very strong, and sit right up next to the boat in the same place every time. And then when I'm done fishing in that spot, it had to be easy to stow it right up here on the gunnel in the same place every time. So I could run down the lake to the next fishing hole, or run back to camp, run home with it up here, nice and secure, in exactly the same place every time, and I don't have to worry about it. And then the last thing I wanted was, if I want to stow the pole in the bottom of the boat for the night, I don't have anything sticking out over the perimeter of the boat, nothing that's going to run into the dock or interfere with my cover. So yeah, I couldn't find anything on YouTube that would do that. The main thing I found on YouTube was how I don't want to do it. And so I think I came up with a pretty good design. It was easy to build. It's not very expensive, and it does all those things that I wanted. So I'm going to take the pole off of here now, so I'm not slinging this 4.5 foot thing with that 5-pound transducer on the end. And it'd be easier to show how I made it, how it works, and how you can make one. So once I knew what I wanted, I thought about it a little bit, and it's really pretty simple. We just want this pole square to the water every time, and when we're done with it, rotate it 90 degrees, move it in, and hang on to it. And so that just screamed to me square tubing and a toggle clamp. So that's the basis of this design. With square tubing and a couple locating holes in it, one there, this slides in. When it falls in the locating hole and you clamp it, the pole is right where it needs to be every time. It's really strong. I guess you can move the boat with it. It can't slip like a ram mount. It's a 500-pound rated toggle clamp. And I set mine up so it's about 1/4 inch from the boat every time. There's no adjusting, no tightening or loosening, no eyeballing it to try to see if it's square or not. And that's the way I like things. It's automatic, it's easy. And then when you're done fishing at this spot, pop the clamp, and you find the other locating hole for the stowed position and clamp it there. Now it's stowed on the gunnel here, secure. I can run down the lake. It's not going to go anywhere. I could even leave it there and run back to camp or run home if necessary. It's in the same place every time. I know where it's going to be, and it's not going anywhere with no adjusting. And then at the end of the day, if I want to stow my pole in the boat somewhere, which I'll probably do, this is all that's left. There's nothing sticking out over the edge of the boat to interfere with the dock and or interfere with my cover. So I think it's really simple and really functional. One thing I guess I ought to add at this point, a note, when this thing's deployed, it's square to the water every time. I've read about and heard about some people with active target want to angle the pole a little bit in scout mode to get a better view. This pole doesn't do that. This pole puts it in square to the water every time, and I think that's a good thing. That's what I wanted. So anyway, if you're still interested, I'll go through the details of how I made it and kind of get a little closer look, and any do-it-yourselfer can figure it out. The only tools I really used were a Sawzall, reciprocating saw, and a drill press. So it's pretty easy. We'll just start with the base here. This is a piece of 2" by 4" angle aluminum, 1/4 inch thick, 6 inches long. It's architectural style aluminum, which means it just doesn't have the big radius in here, or the radius is out here, because you need that sharp corner in there so the square will sit down in there all the way. It's got mounting holes here and here, countersunk so they're flush, and 2 more mounting holes back here. And this, what you see in here, that's my locating pin, so to speak, is just a number 10 machine screw coming up from the bottom with a self-locking nylock nut on it. And once I got that in there and tightened, I cut the screw off. I guess I used my Dremel tool. I don't know if I mentioned that, but I cut the screw off and then sanded that down so it's not gouging into the aluminum. So this is 6 inches long. It's plenty. And most of the places that sell aluminum like this will sell it by the foot. So if you want to put this in 2 places on your boat like I did, buy a foot and cut it in half and you have both of them. Then the next piece here, I call it the clamp mount. It's just 1.5" by 2" rectangular tubing, 1/8 inch wall. It's 5.5 inches long. I almost forgot why I made it 5.5 inches, but there's a 1/4 inch gap over here at the end, and so I left a 1/4 inch the rest of the way around, just so it looked the same. This is held on by 2 machine screws in here coming up from the bottom with self-locking nuts, one here and one at the other end. And then there's 2 more mounting holes back here that go through both this and this to mount it to the bolt, to the boat, and also to hold this tubing down to the base. If there's anything critical about building this, or a little bit tricky, it's getting this in the right place here for the right clearance. And so what I did for that, before this screw was in here or anything, I put the square in here, and I put 2 sheets of paper in here and clamped it all together, clamped it down, and then turned it over and drilled these 2 mounting holes for it. And paper is typically 3/1000 of an inch thick, so 2 sheets gives it 6/1000 clearance, and that's what this one right here has. When I got it on the water the first time, it was a pretty rough day, and it was a little bit tricky getting it in there, out in the waves every time. So on the one that I made for the bow of the boat, I put 3 sheets of paper in here, 9/1000 clearance, and that's perfect. So I think that'd be the recommended way to do it. So that's the only tricky part. So then moving along, the square, it's just a piece of 1.5" square tubing, 1/8 inch wall, and the length of it just kind of depends on your boat. And in my case, it's 11 inches long. That's all I needed to have this base kind of centered in the gunnel here, and have it hang over a 1/4 inch to clear the boat. And then, well, the only machining on it or anything are the 2 locating holes. This one's an inch from the end for the deployed position because this is an inch from the end. And I wanted it to be fully in there and flush with the end to have maximum rigidity when it was deployed. And then the other hole is just wherever it needs to be, wherever you want it stowed. In my case, I brought it almost as far in as it would go, and that's 3.5 inches from the end in this case. So then there's this piece of angle here that the your PVC pole or whatever kind of pole you have would be clamped to with hose clamps. And it's just 1.5 by 1.5 angle aluminum. I got 3/16 thick here, and it is the structural type that has the big radius here and the radii out here. There's plenty of clearance in here for that radius. You might be able to see, this is these two are welded together. I don't know if you can see it, but my intention was to put them together with machine screws. And when I actually got these pieces in hand, I thought that's kind of tight in there to get screws in there, and so I work with a local shop sometimes on projects, and I took this in there and said, what would you take to weld that in 2 places? And they said $20 in 5 minutes, and so that's what I did. But it can be screwed together. One thing you got to watch out for is you got to countersink the screw heads to clear the PVC, and so maybe you want thicker aluminum to have the countersinks, have room for the countersinks, or maybe even wider or a bigger square. Another thought I had was you could put the outer pole clear down here and just have the inner pole coming up here, and that leaves this much clearance already for the screw heads. At any rate, they just need to be attached 90 degrees to each other, and they're good to go. And then, excuse me, lastly is the toggle clamp itself. These are just 500-pound rated stainless steel toggle clamps from the toggleclampstore.com. They're like 12 or 13 bucks. You can get zinc plated for half that, $6 or $7. One thing to be aware of there, if you were to order some of these, their picture showed the rubber foot on here, which is what I wanted to go against the to go against the aluminum. And when I got them, they had steel feet on them, so I contacted them, and they said they don't have these in stainless. So I said, well, I want them anyway, and they sent me, for my 2 clamps, they sent me 4 of these that are zinc plated, which is fine. So now I've seen that they updated their webpage to show it without these, but I know you can buy these individually, so I'm sure they'd substitute them if you wanted to. And then I added the cap nut here, stainless steel or acorn nut, whatever you want to call it, just to be nice and smooth. My cover touches the other one, the one up front, and so it's a nice smooth surface. So that's the parts. The aluminum probably could be painted or anodized, but it's not going to rust. And I kind of like it, the do-it-yourself finish. So I'm just going to leave it like that. It will oxidize, and if you rub around on it, you could get a little aluminum oxide black stuff on your hands, but I'm just going to leave it that way. We'll talk a little bit about installing it. I mean, when you size everything and get the length of this mainly, you need to know about where the base is going to install on your boat. And I have these nice generous gunnels, and a lot of boats don't have those, so you may need a completely different way of mounting it, maybe 2 mounting holes going in the gunnel and then some kind of leg going down to the floor of the boat or whatever. But in this case, mounting it, the way I did it was put it in the stowed position like that with the pole on it, and then you can rotate it around to get it to land exactly where you want it. If you got stuff out there like I have reel or a rod holder base out there. Up at the bow, I have a radio antenna, a cleat, and a bimini top hook, kind of in the way, but it fits right in there because it goes the same place every time. But anyway, get it so where that's where you want it. I mark this with tape and then try to hold the base still, go to the deployed position and see where you're at this way. You may have to move it in or out just a little. If you move it, say, out a 1/4 inch, then it's going to move out here a 1/4 inch too at the other end. But you can correct that then just by rotating it just slightly, and it'll move the other end back in, and then mark it, and that's where you need to be. And then what I did to mount it, I put this screw in first, so I had one corner, and then I went back to the deployed or the stowed position, and then you can still rotate it a little, and got it exactly where I wanted it. And then I put the opposite mounting screw in on this corner, and then that locks it down, and then verified that it was still okay in the deployed position, and then put the rest of the screws in. The other thing about mounting, I like it, I wanted the pole to be square to the water every time. Well, it can only be that if your base is square to the water when you're in the fishing mode of your boat. So you need to know how the boat sits when you're fishing, and it's just like the coin method for adjusting your structure scan transducer, and just get the boat set in the shop the way it sits on the water, and then if necessary, put washers under these corners to get this so that when it's deployed, that pole is level, and then it will be level every time. On my boat, at the console here, I needed no washers at all. And then when I put the one up at the bow of my gunnel up there is a little bit warped, and I don't know what all, but I've got, and these are just thin number 10 stainless steel washers, but I got 6 of them here, 3 here, and none here. So it cants it like that, but in the fishing position, it's dead square to the water, and it should stay that way every time. So let's see, what else? Cost. I'll have to confess up front, my dad used to have an aluminum supply store, and my uncle still has 1 million pounds of aluminum in his backyard in Denver, Colorado. He calls it Alrico Aluminum Supply. So I have good access to aluminum, but I've listed links in the description where you can get this stuff online at onlinemetals.com. I've used them for some steel parts, and they're really good to work with. The aluminum here, if you buy materials for 2 of these, like I did, and you buy 2 clamps, you buy enough for 2 of these. What you're looking at here, aluminum and clamps with shipping included, not counting the nuts and bolts. I think it's $31 and $32 for this base unit. So $32 for each of those. The aluminum here, these 2 pieces, and again, not counting fastening it together, whether you weld it or screws or whatever, these 2 are $17, and you only need one of these. So for 2 positions on the boat, just like this, $81 for all the material except the screws. And that is at April 2022 prices. It has gone up 30% since I built mine in November of 21. So I thought it was going to be cheaper, and mine is really cheap, but it's still, I think it's pretty reasonable for what it does and what it is. So to wrap things up, I'm going to put the whole transducer pole back on here and point out a few things that I did with my pole that I hadn't seen on YouTube, but I think are pretty handy, and maybe somebody would want to use those ideas. So I'll do that. So here it is again in the deployed position. And the first thing I added that I hadn't seen, or at least not this way of doing it, is I just added one of these simple thumb screw type hose clamps to stop rotation of it. So if you got current or something, you don't want the transducer to rotate, just a little turn on there stops it. I had to slot the outer PVC with my Sawzall in a few places to give it the clearance to do that. But that's a handy, easy way to do that. And really why I did that was because with this design, to stow it, I need to remove my handle because I need the transducer up, which means the handle is down. And so I stow it. To stow it, I remove the handle and lock it in that position and pop the clamp, raise it up. And this is the second thing I added that I hadn't seen anybody use, but it's an old gate handle that I had laying around and never used. But the reason I put it on here is because, as you can see, I mounted it at the center of gravity of this whole assembly, or the balance point. So whenever I grab it, I don't have to be looking at it. This thing is going to be pretty much horizontal when I pick it up by that handle. And that's kind of important because with this design, you need to be pretty horizontal to fit in the base here so you can clamp it in. So that's been really handy and really simple. It's just an old gate handle, hose clamped on. And then the third thing I added was this foot out here. I was going to put some kind of yoke out here that it would land in, attach it to the boat. And as I was developing this thing, I needed something to keep this horizontal while I was working on it, and I took some 5/4 deck board, so it's pressure treated, inch thick, cut a 2-inch hole in it with a hole saw, and then split it, and made some little angle brackets out of angle aluminum, and hose clamped it on. And it works so well, I think I'm just going to leave it because I'd rather have that, I think, than one more thing attached to my boat that could be in the way sometime. If I really want it secure, I'll have it inside the boat and secured down. So those are just some things that I added that I hadn't seen on YouTube that I think really help for my design, and it might be helpful for somebody else. Anyway, that's my stow and deploy device. Again, I think it's pretty simple and effective, and that's why I just wanted to share it in case anybody else wants to use it. I've had it on the water a few times, and it's worked really well. I've run it up to 5 miles an hour with a big motor with it deployed, and it's really solid. I think the PVC probably bends a little bit, but the rest of the device doesn't move at all. So I think it's going to be a real solid solution to the problems I had. So any questions or comments or better ideas, feel free to post them in the comments and I'll reply. So thanks for watching and good luck fishing.